the number 9.
My biggest concern is that Mexico does tend to make those little mistakes defensively, but it's the inconsistencies. With the
Isn't this inconsistent though?
He's going to be on the ground for the majority of the time. No,
I
look
don't
back at highlights. No, if you
that's the
have
Christian Pulisic treatment though.
Same.
We're gonna have to stop this. We're gonna start arguing on this podcast, aren't we?
Hello. Welcome back to the Real Futbol Show. I'm Lizzy with co-host Geno. How you doing?
Pretty good. Can't complain. You know, we've had 4 days now? 5 days? What is it? Day 4 of the World Cup. So not much to complain about when you get to have soccer on, while you're working the entire day. So not too bad. Not too shabby.
Nope. 5 a.m. to 4 p.m. on the East Coast. Not too bad. So as promised, we will be doing recaps for all CONCACAF nations at the World Cup, which is the U.S. men's national team, Canada men's national team, Mexico, and Costa Rica, which we've given absolutely zero love to in the past. But We'll recap a little bit now. There's so much action. As always, beyond this podcast, follow us on Twitter at 90minUS and Instagram 90minUSA. We'll be there doing lives, doing recaps, basically covering all the action.
And if you didn't get that, guess what? They're on the bottom of these screens, so you can just look right there. You don't even have to worry about it. It's right there for you. Very easy.
So to kick off, we're going to have a special guest. Chris Smith is joining us to talk about all things Canada men's national team. He's part of our 90min network in the USA. He writes, he does it all. Welcome. I think he's there.
I see him there. He's there. We got him. I think a little jumpy there, but
there we go. I'm
there
now.
We go. How you doing, Chris?
Sorry. I'm good, thank you, guys. Just dealing with some really well-timed internet issues. I'm pretty exhausted after jumping around my living room watching Canada. So,
yeah, it was a pretty interesting game overall. I mean, I think a lot of people, and you can probably go into more depth in this, as you probably know a little bit more about them than we do. But I mean, I think a lot of people went in this match not expecting much, and they got a lot more than they were expecting. A team that, kind of came onto the stage and showed who they were throughout CONCACAF qualifying in the World Cup.
Yeah, exactly. I think a lot of people over in the UK, especially, in the pre-match build-up, were really underestimating Canada and sort of talking them up to this plucky team that are probably going to get rolled over by Belgium. But obviously, those of us that cover them a bit more closely know they were in qualifying, and they just came and took the game right to Belgium. And I think anybody who's watched this Canadian team over the last couple of years, just how effective it was truly impressive. And for a while there, I think Belgium were really scared.
Yeah, I think we saw them kick off very strong right away. And within the first 10 minutes, there was an opportunity at goal. Penalty, craziness. Their first chance at a first ever World Cup goal. We know Canada last qualified in 1986, 36 years ago, but they failed to score in either the first 3 group stage matches. They ended in 4th, failed to qualify. So that was their first chance, Alphonso Davies, and he missed. So there's a lot of people who said that he was an up-and-coming player, other people who say he didn't deserve that penalty, but he missed nonetheless.
Yeah, Chris, what's your opinion on this? I mean, for me personally, I love Alphonso Davies. I think he's a fantastic player, but a guy who plays left back for his club team doesn't typically get to take those penalty kicks. Also coming off of an injury as well. Your thoughts on Davies being the one that stepped up and took the kick there?
Yeah, I mean, anyone needs telling that Alphonso Davies is Canada's best player by some distance. But I think if you're not Sergio Ramos, then a defender shouldn't be taking a penalty. And I think we all really thought Jonathan David was going to be the guy maybe to step up, or even someone with a lot of experience, like Atiba Hutchinson, maybe with, the calm, cool head in a big pressure situation. But, Davies obviously has the talent and fancied himself. And I don't know whether the pressure got to him. Maybe he changed his mind at the last moment. He didn't commit enough to where he was going and made it too easy for Thibaut Courtois. So a chance blown, but I don't want to be too hard on a very young guy missing in such a high pressure situation.
And you talk about Atiba Hutchinson. Geno and I have previously had this debate whether you prefer a young squad or one with more experience at the World Cup. Geno, you can no longer say the Mexican team is old. He is a 39-year-old player on the field, officially FIFA's oldest player beyond a goalkeeper. So what do you think?
In fairness, one player doesn't make a whole team. So,
But you officially can't say about Mexico anymore.
Yeah, but I mean, again, my personal opinion on the whole situation, I agree. Defenders should not be taking penalty kicks no matter what. And I know for Canada, he plays a little higher up as he did today. But, I think you're right. Jonathan David, somebody else should have been taking that penalty kick. And again, listen, I mean, we saw yesterday in the Mexican game, which we will get to, Robert Lewandowski, one of the best strikers in the world, miss a penalty kick. So it can happen to anybody. But again, in my personal opinion, I probably would have went with somebody else on that, with such a high pressure situation and so early in the game too. But.
And then further on in the game, we saw there was another foul inside Belgium's box, but the referee did not call that to be a penalty. I'd love to hear both of your thoughts on whether they deserved a second penalty or not.
Chris, you want to take this one first?
I was going to say which one. There was two.
Yeah.
Because, I specifically remember Ray being brought down by Axel Witsel, I believe, in the box as well.
Yeah, it was. Yep.
Bit of a clumsy coming together. Listen, maybe I'm a bit biased, but I think they were both penalties. I think Canada have been a little hard done by there. And, on other days, maybe you get those, other days you don't, which is really frustrating because VAR is supposed to take that kind of conversation out of the question.
Mm-hmm.
But I think when John Herdman looks back on the performance as a whole and the way the game went, I don't think he's going to be focusing on that too much as it might be frustrating. That there are a lot more positives and a few things to work on besides penalties, which has come down to luck in the end.
Yeah, no, I mean, the second one, the one that wasn't the offsides one, I could see a little bit more reason. The legs kind of left there, player goes a little bit slower, kind of a coming together. Still, I think what in many situations would be called a penalty. Surprised it wasn't, considering how much we've already seen so many penalties already, and this emphasis on protecting the players inside the box and the holding and all that. Who knows if maybe the fact that Canada already gotten a penalty played a role in that decision. Obviously, I'm sure the referee did not want to give two penalties. But again, like you said, VAR is supposed to rectify this whole situation about what is and what isn't a penalty. The second one, the offsides one, is a difficult one, as they were explaining on the broadcast, because I think VAR checked for the offsides, and which again, it was not offsides to begin with. Then it was a whole mess of things that got kind of jumbled into one. But I think that one is probably, for me, more of the one to have a gripe with. But yeah, again, I think they both were probably penalties, but I don't think John Herdman is going to be disappointed with the effort or what went wrong. It's Davies makes that penalty. It's a 1-1 game, or it's a 1-0 game at that point. Maybe in that situation, it's a little bit more of a talking point, because then you go up possibly 2-0. But yeah, overall, I think Canada just played so well, and that's probably not the first thing on John Herdman's mind, or despite the fact that he probably got asked that the first question at the press conference today.
So today, with Alphonso Davies's opportunity, that marks the 8th penalty so far this World Cup, which is an astonishing number given the fact that we've just pretty much concluded the first round of the group stage matches. But the entire game really begs the question, did Canada deserve more? Now, given the penalty and their chances at goal, I think, though unlucky, the scoreline really says it all. You really have to convert those opportunities when given the chance. But what do you guys think?
I mean, if we're talking raw chance creation, expected goals, which divides everyone, and pure stats, Canada did way more than enough to be at least 1, maybe 2-0 up at halftime. Obviously, they burned out a little bit in the second half, Still created a couple of chances, still had a threat. It ended up, I think it was 22-9 in Canada's favour on shots. And, even in the second half when Belgium were dominating, they still had 5 shots. That was it. And they only had 4 in the first half. So, yeah, on the balance of the game, Canada absolutely deserved at least something. That being said, I kind of agree with Lizzy where, when you create those chances, you then have to take them. And that's where, a team like Belgium will take that chance and will probably go further in the tournament. And maybe, we might see a similar game with Canada going against Croatia. And that's where maybe someone like Ivan Perisic might take the chance. And that's where, for this World Cup, Canada gets let down. But again, a lot to be optimistic for. And, it's all these experiences that might just carry them through in the next World Cup. I know we're not really thinking about that yet, but these are valuable experiences.
We always are.
Players. Yeah.
We always
are. You guys are.
Yes. We always are looking towards the next World Cup. But yeah, no, I think in in like you guys said, it kind of felt like, yes, they had 22 shots, but a lot of those shots felt rushed or kind of, just swinging a foot at the ball, hoping to hit a target. Headers up in the air where you're just trying to find the target. Like you said, that experience in a World Cup where it was the first game that any of them have played in a World Cup, the first game the country's played in a World Cup in 36 years. I think a lot of that adrenaline plays a role in that, and you're just looking to find the net any way you can. And once those first few shots don't go in, it's similar to, what they say in basketball, that net starts to look a little bit smaller. I think even in this situation with Thibaut Courtois being as tall as he is already and being as good as a goalkeeper is already, kind of deflates you as the game goes on. And they had their chances, but, yes, did they have, if you go by expected goals, according to FUTMOB, it's 2.61, I think, for Canada.
That's
but it's a lot. It's a lot.
There's a penalty involved there as well, but
yes,
is still
exactly.
a high number.
Still, if you take out the penalty, which we've seen in the last couple of days has been like basically a 1 of expected goal, that's still another 1.61. So they deserved, I think, the way they played overall probably warranted a point out of this one. But like you guys have mentioned, you have to finish your chances, and that's going to be a topic of conversation, I'm sure, not only for Canada and not the last time we talk about this at this World Cup.
Well, before we wrap up the Canada session with Chris, 2 questions for you. Is this the Canada you expected? And what do you hope to see in their next match?
It is a tiny little bit more than I expected, if I'm being completely honest. I expected them to really take the game to everyone that they played, but I didn't expect them to have Belgium on the ropes that much in the first half. So, yeah, I expected them to be good, just not that good. And I suppose for upcoming games, I expect more of the same, but just take your chances. Like, you've had your free hit now against Belgium. The next 2 games are way more winnable. Play how you did tonight and finish your chances. And 4 points, maybe even 6 if we're really dreaming, but it's not beyond the realms of possibility because Croatia looked very ordinary this morning. Morocco were okay, but have their limitations. And I think, pound for pound, if you're looking at the difference makers in those teams, Canada are right up there with them.
Yeah, for sure. I think, like we said on the podcast, I definitely underestimated Canada, which is, you would think I would have learned by now, considering how they played in the CONCACAF qualifying. I think a lot of times, like we said, in certain situations, we think, oh, maybe this doesn't translate because it's CONCACAF. We've had this discussion before, but Canada showed that they're just as good as they were in the CONCACAF, and they can just, create those chances that they created. So I was very surprised and, I think from a neutral perspective, happy for Canada and the Canadian fans with how they performed. And like Chris said, I mean, it's going to be a little bit of a different game maybe against Morocco where they might have to be, not that they weren't on the front foot, but they won't have to worry about as much of the attacking threat that Belgium had. Whereas in Croatia, you have Luka Modric in the midfield, Brozovic, some of those guys who are a little more talented. Morocco doesn't have that as much, so they might be sitting back a little bit more depending on how results go. But because do Canada play Croatia next or Morocco?
Croatia and conclude with Morocco. And the Moroccan versus Croatian result really opened up the group. Yeah, it's sure. Belgium first with 3, then Croatia and Morocco both tied at 1 point, and Canada at 0 currently, but we know things to change, and this World Cup is truly one of surprises.
Yeah, I mean, after today's performance, I would not be surprised if Canada take 4 points at the very least from the next 2 games.
Exactly.
I think Ford does it as well.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. And I can't leave this podcast, Geno, without saying I hope you have an absolutely terrible day on Friday.
I said, Chris, I said, I don't understand the English hate for Jordan Pickford, but if there's one game where I want him to be absolutely awful, it's Friday. I will live with the English hate for Jordan Pickford if he is just awful on Friday.
If England lose that, I don't think I can show my face on Twitter ever again, can I?
I'm not sure anybody from the English side will be able to show their face on Twitter. I think it's going to be interesting. We'll see. It's certainly, I'm sure it's going to be an affair, at least in the lead up to the game. But Harry Kane's ankle, maybe he doesn't start.
I've never been so nervous for a game in my entire life. I'll promise you that. So
yeah, I understand. Yeah, it's weird because, and we're getting into a little bit of talk, but real quick, the Wales-Iran game, I think, really determines a lot of what happens in the England.
And who is going to wake up at 5 a.m. for that?
There's no shot.
Not you.
There's no shot.
Well, thanks so much, Chris, for being on with us.
Yeah,
and
thanks,
you
Chris.
can keep reading him on 90min.com/US and on Twitter. And we're going to have him on this podcast a couple more times. And hopefully, if Canada get to the round of 16, then we'll get to him as well.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, Chris.
Thanks so much. Now, hopping right into Mexico versus Poland, it was
Saving
a highly
for last.
Yep, a highly anticipated game in Group C, especially because it seemed to be the most equal in the sense. Obviously, prior to the World Cup kicking off, everyone expected Argentina to lead standings. We know that's not the case. I did not watch the 5 a.m. game, but definitely woke up with a giant smile on my face. Though it does complicate standings for Mexico and Poland. But
it definitely does. Yeah, it definitely does. It makes it significantly more interesting now. And again, I mean, listen, who knows what I mean, obviously, I think a lot of people expect Argentina to rebound from that, but I don't know, maybe it gives you some confidence going into your game that
it never does.
Yeah,
Nothing ever does.
but yeah.
Yeah.
We'll get into it.
But basically, we saw a 0-0 draw, and for the score line to be quite deceiving because it was action-packed. We saw chances on both ends, and obviously we know Guillermo Ochoa saved that Robert Lewandowski penalty. So now the Polish striker still is without a World Cup goal ever, which is definitely interesting, and glad that we could play our part in that.
You're glad that you could play a part in him not having a World Cup goal.
Yeah, no, I enjoyed it. Personally enjoyed it. I do.
Personally, I don't understand why everybody else doesn't know how to take penalties, but Gareth Bale just knows how to blast one into the upper right-hand corner.
Yeah, that's
my personal opinion.
I don't think, as opposed to Alphonso Davies's penalty, I don't think Lewandowski's penalty was badly taken. I just think Ochoa did an excellent job at timing his dive and guessing where that could go. And if you see the video in very slow motion, you saw Ochoa dive to the other edge first before making his committed dive to the right, I believe it was, to kind of trick play. That was excellent on his end. He saved 17 penalties in his entire career. 4 have been for Mexico. And he did say after the match that life is curious in the way that it works because he hasn't saved one in quite some time, but it's especially a technique and something he's been working on with the goalkeeping coach of the Mexican national team. So he kind of just walked it off laughing. And then, as he is in his humble ways, credited the defense and the midfield for blocking every opportunity, when in fact he was Budweiser's player of the match, as
Always
he should
is.
have been.
Always is that Memo Ochoa. Always finds a way to do it in the World Cup.
I keep telling people, and people keep doubting him. But no,
I don't know
World Cup
how,
and
because
he's
like
there.
half the time that Mexico wins a game, he's got 5 saves. Like I feel like he's always at the middle of everything that they do at the World Cup. And I mean, I don't know, personally for me, I don't think it was as poorly taken as Alphonso Davies, but he didn't find the corner and he left it at a decent height. You know, it's like he didn't put it
Right.
in, you know, he left it at a decent height where if Memo Ochoa is guessing the right spot, he can block it with other parts of his body. You know, it's like obviously you have to guess it first. I think he could have done a little bit better with the penalty, but again, you know, Memo Ochoa, fantastic save. I mean, you have to get there. It's just, you know, disappointing that Gareth Bale can, you know, try and just, you know, maybe keep it on the ground. I don't know, a little slower.
Okay,
something.
First of all, though, Matt Turner is not Memo Ochoa.
Yeah, but he gets the right way.
Mm.
And he got a finger on the ball that was going 800 miles an hour.
That's even worse. I was fortunate enough to speak with Memo Ochoa prior to the World Cup, and I asked him how his role had evolved with the Mexican national team throughout his 5 World Cups and obviously in the years in between. And he basically spoke on his ability to influence the younger players, his ability to have that leadership role both on and off the field. And that's exactly what we saw against Poland. He has a way of calming those around him and reassuring the back line. That video, by the way, is up on my Twitter and going to be up on the 90min US Twitter as well. So you can tune into that after this podcast. And yeah, he's a voice of reason within that podcast, which I mean, within that field, which is great.
He could be a voice of reason on this podcast too, if he wants. I mean, he can come on.
Yeah, he can jump right in. He's welcome anytime. Amazing leader. Now, backtracking a little bit to how that penalty came to be. Now, for me, and I truly am trying to take the bias out of everything, but it was a soft VAR penalty. Now, the referee didn't initially see it and didn't even initially go and check it himself when VAR was reviewing it, which to me defeats the purpose of actually VAR. It's being used to nitpick every single little situation. In reality, it was introduced as something that would aid referees if something major happened that they just simply could not get their eyes on, and instead has been used to criticize and stop. And just like and we've seen it with offside before. It's the inch, the hair, the toe even. So it was a soft penalty for me. I don't think.
But didn't the referee? I mean, the referee went to the monitor before he
afterwards,
right?
Not initially though.
Yeah, but I mean, that's the thing. I mean, with VAR, I think, you know, I guess the unfortunate part, or I don't really know, however you look at it, is that the VAR is the person that has to tell the referee to go to the monitor. Like the referee can't just make that. So like the VAR is looking at the replays, whatever. So like I don't have
a while. Like it wasn't immediate as we've seen in the past. It was a questionable take. Yeah. I mean, if you review a play to a certain extent, of course, but again, it wasn't initially meant to be used as a way of nitpicking every situation.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a problem. That's a problem with replay all over the place, but specifically in soccer, in the sense that it's supposed to be clear and obvious.
Exactly.
And if it takes you more than
wasn't.
Yeah, and if it takes you more than 2 minutes to come up with a decision, whether you think the referee should figure out whether it's clear or obvious, then it's not clear and obvious. So that's the problem. I agree with you. I think that the penalty was a soft penalty. Again, taking the biases out of it, you know, I think it was a soft penalty. I don't, you know, I think I put on Twitter afterwards, ball don't lie, because realistically, they did not deserve that penalty. Like, I think it was very soft. I think what the referee ended up seeing and what the VAR people end up seeing was that last little attempt to get in front of Lewandowski to shield him from the ball. And maybe they saw that as a kick out or a trip or something like that. But for me, it's like, I don't know. There wasn't much in it. It was a 50-50 ball that they were both fighting for. I think you could have called a foul on either of those guys and it wouldn't have been questioned. But yeah, I think it was a tough penalty, because I'm not even sure you give that outside the box. I'm not sure that's a foul outside the box.
It was, I don't know. I think the refereeing was inconsistent throughout the match. We saw fouls given to Mexico when they shouldn't have been, and Poland when Mexico would do the same thing.
Which has been a little bit of a theme, you know. I mean, at least
it's been a weird tournament. When it comes to added time, penalties, even, and everything and anything in between. But I won't blame the refereeing when it came to the scoreline. I was initially expecting more from Mexico. That first half really was dominant from El Tri. And I personally was very excited to see Alexis Vega kicking off, Chucky Lozano kicking off. I think their versatility on the wings is amazing. I don't know if you noticed halfway through the match, they switched sides to just trick around Poland a little bit before switching back. But that's the ability they both have on the ball. Mm-hmm. Alexis Vega was great. He missed 1 or 2 shots on goal, but otherwise, I thought it was an excellent game by both of them.
Yeah, I mean, I think we talked about this, right? We talked about this in the podcast leading up to this. Mexico's finishing needs to be better. We talked about it with Canada, and it needs to be better for Mexico. Felt like there was a lot of, in the final third, which is the case with, you know, we could talk about it with probably all of the CONCACAF teams. We can talk about it with probably, I mean, I know we could talk about it with Everton in terms of club-related seasons. We can probably talk about it with a lot of teams. But I just think that the final ball, the final third play from Mexico, it just wasn't good enough to warrant. Like, I don't know. Just thinking back to the game, and again, I'd have to rewatch it to really remember. But I'm trying to think of a time where Szczesny was like really, really tested, or there was one
time. There was one time in particular, Henry Martin, our number 9, headed the ball, and Szczesny really had to stretch to make that save. But
other than that, it's like you need, in a game where my problem with this game and how Mexico played this game is that if you looked at Poland on the attack, like they literally could not string passes together. They were passing behind players, passing out of bounds. They had nothing going forward. And it felt like Mexico could have just upped the pressure, kept pushing them, kept throwing balls into the box, which is what they should have done. We'll talk about this in a little bit when Raul Jimenez came on. But it felt like they couldn't hit that next stride, which is the stride. You know, they needed to find that final ball. It felt like it was there for the taking, but they just couldn't find it. And that's why, you know, we ended with a 0-0 scoreline instead of, you know, Mexico taking all 3 points, I think.
Yeah, Mexico could have. They definitely deserved more than 1 point given the intensity of the first half. Mm-hmm. However, as the game continued, Mexico lost their power. I personally, and I know a lot of people have contradicting thoughts, and he has quickly become a controversial player. I pretty much enjoyed Héctor Herrera's performance, though I do think he was left on the field a little too long because he did run out of gas. But he was everywhere in that first half. Literally defending, like in the offense, making the runs. He's not the quickest player on the field anymore, and that's obviously where age comes to play. But his experience showed. He made a couple mistakes here and there with passes, but I think he was an excellent player in the midfield. And then when we saw him subbed off and Charlie Rodriguez entered the game, he made several mistakes. I think that's why he lost his starting role in the team. But
it's so funny how we talk about this, and we could relate 95% of the comments we're making about this to because I'm going to make the same comments about the U.S. too, about how some of the changes worked or didn't work and whatnot. I think that very similar way, you know. I think Hector, it seemed like what was working was the second ball the late runners, for the Mexican national team. Every time, like Hector Herrera got in the box a couple times, tried to float the ball over, or they sent a long ball down the side to a late runner down the side, and they seemed to get, a quality look, a quality chance at a goal there. So yeah, I mean, Hector Herrera, you're right. I think he dominated a lot of the parts of the game, for his age. I think he played really, really well. And was he coming off of an injury, or I forget what
he was an initial knock. He hadn't been playing in the weeks leading up to the tournament. Yeah. Ever since joining the Houston Dynamo, he's been on and off.
Yeah. And never mind the fact that he had, has a break, Houston Dynamo didn't make the playoffs. So he hasn't played since what,
Yeah, he had a couple weeks off. I also think when speaking about that final third and their push, they're a little afraid. Mexico really, really could not afford to lose this game. So on that front foot, and you saw Chucky a couple times where he wouldn't take that risk when face to face with a defender. He would pass back, and there was just a lack of initiative and creativity when it came to finally shooting the ball. And it's been a common theme with Mexico in general throughout the CONCACAF qualifiers and in other CONCACAF tournaments where every individual in that attacking line is so afraid to be the ones to mess up and to be the one that caused that counter attack. So instead of taking the chance, they really just pass it back. And then you see passing the ball, switching the field, just inside that final third, but none of them really take that chance on goal, which is why I think players like Alexis Vega, even Uriel Antuna, or like even Luis Chavez, they take that opportunity because they're the fresh new faces and aren't as afraid. But I think with Argentina, had they won, it would have been a little bit different because Mexico probably would have gone into it thinking we can afford to lose it. So we're going to do everything we can to win. However, their 2-1 loss to Saudi Arabia kind of changed the trajectory. But before we get there, I would love to see what you thought of Raul Jimenez in that second half.
I mean, I thought he got on the ball well. You know, it's again, like I said, I feel like they failed to utilize his presence in the middle of the field. I mean, it's hard because, as they mentioned on the broadcast, Poland has a lot of big center backs, big center backs. Szczesny's very good at coming for the ball and picking out those right spots. So it's hard to do that. Sometimes it needs to be pinpoint accuracy, perfect to get that ball to work. But it still felt like he wasn't utilized as well as he could have been. I think, you know, obviously he's still coming off of the injury, hasn't really gotten up to match fitness. There's still some things that I'm sure he needs to figure out. But I think when he was on the ball, he was good. He was, effective. But again, I just don't think they were able to get him the ball enough to have him make an impact.
Well, that's when I say, or in general, this was never going to be the game for number 9.
Yeah.
It just wasn't.
Yeah.
And that's why Tata Martino has so long pushed for an associative number 9 that can go way beyond his responsibilities of just tapping that ball into it when given the opportunity. And that's something Henry Martin is not. To no fault of his own, he's just not that type of player, which is why he was never prioritized when Raul was fully fit. And we saw their differences, even with a 65% fit Raul Jimenez, he was on the ball way more than Henry Martin was. Now, I'm not diminishing his ability on the ball. He did score 12 goals for Club America throughout La Apertura. So he knows what to do and he can score, but he's not that associative number 9 figure that sometimes El Tri need on the attack. We need a player that has double the chances.
Well, I think in this specific game too, you needed a player who was going to be able to pick his runs out really well, because you need a creative midfielder who's going to be able to pick a pass that not 95% of the players in the world cannot see. You know, this is where a guy like Kevin De Bruyne makes his name, in a situation like this against a team that's always going to be sitting back playing defensive football. You need to have a little bit of creativity, and you need a striker or a player who's going to make those creative runs that's going to find them open space against a back 5 of slow, tall center backs, So
and
I think that was
through the center.
Yeah, that's the thing. Poland, we talked about this, is all they do. So they know how to do this, and you have to figure out a way to spread them out and then make those runs in between. And I think the passing it from side to side and but it's got to be quicker. It's got to be quicker from side to side. The decision-making has to be a little bit quicker to break that down.
Exactly. And we can quote it back. We have the clip. Did I not tell you that I was afraid of Mexico's little defensive mistakes that could cause a set-piece goal? Now, they were given the chances quite a few times. We saw a couple of free kicks, a lot of corners, and obviously that penalty. That was just a tiny little error on that end. A very anxious Jorge Sanchez on the ball. Now, I understand he's a young figure. It was his World Cup debut. of course he's going to be anxious on the ball. He did receive an early yellow card, which led me to believe that he would be subbed out for Kevin Alvarez, who's not a bad second choice, but he simply wasn't. Now Jorge Sanchez plays in Ajax. It's his first season. He made the move in the summer from Club America, so that was excellent. But yeah, those little defensive mistakes led me to run absolutely out of the room and yell in terror. To be
it's, you said, I think it's in the intro, what you said about, I think it's in the intro.
Yeah.
So fans know, the fans know.
I was afraid.
But yeah, it's, like you said, it was never going to be clearly Mexico's defensive effort. Like, they were never going to have to defend for 90 straight minutes, or they were never going to have to get themselves into a game where it was back and forth. But they just didn't take advantage of those chances. And then the one little mistake could have cost them. It didn't, thankfully, to Memo Ochoa, but
it didn't. And I also want to call that a little bit karma, because as we said, it wasn't a deserving penalty, but Memo Ochoa was there. And that celebration with Edson Alvarez was absolutely incredible once he stopped that. But
you said Edson Alvarez wasn't going to start, and then he did. So what were your thoughts on that?
And now looking back at it, it might have been a ruse, because he wasn't playing in any of the friendlies prior, and he wasn't in any of the training exercises prior.
Yeah.
So it might have been a decoy, but I, for one, was very glad to see him on. And I said it from the beginning, I think Mexico has few physically dominant players, and Edson Alvarez is one of them. Mexicans are traditionally not the tallest at the World Cup and the most physically built. It's actually become a common theme of Liga MX players that when they make that move to Europe, clubs often ask for more time in the gym and more dominance in that way to try and build themselves up. Just because in Liga MX it's not necessarily a priority, but once you're facing Poland or even Saudi Arabia or even Argentina, you need physically dominant players. So in my opinion, benching Edson Alvarez, one of the few, would have been a mistake. Now we do,
especially on set pieces,
exactly, and that's why we have Cesar Montes, and that's why we have Hector Moreno up there. But Jorge Sanchez in comparison, short. Jesus Gallardo, short. So you definitely need Edson Alvarez to come and be that player. It'll be an interesting match against Argentina on Saturday.
Very important.
I cannot say I'm looking forward to it.
Do they play before or after Poland plays?
I believe it might be at the same time.
No, it's same time on
it is
Wednesday.
No, I believe then after, because Mexico is at 2 p.m.
Okay, then
it is. They gave them this stellar time.
This stellar prime time.
But yeah, now
the U.S. plays at 2 p.m. every single time. So
that's an excellent point. Switching over now to the U.S. men's national team. Another draw. And it was incredible.
I mean, okay, this is gonna be an interesting segment.
I'm excited for this one. I have so many thoughts, and I enjoyed that game 100%. I did not suffer as I did the Mexico.
I know, and I didn't suffer in the Mexico game either. So
I'm so glad you could have enjoyed that. I didn't.
Well, that's life.
The magic of it all.
The magic of soccer, right? Like I said, I if you told me before the game started, said 1-1 was good. Like you said that's what your prediction was.
Yeah,
1-1. I would have said to you, great, take it, whatever, wrap it up, and let's go after England on Friday. But after the first half, you sit there and you look at the chances they had, and after the penalty and just how they responded, it's just like there were 3 points similar to the Mexico. 3 points were there for the taking, but in a much different sense, which we will talk about. There's a distinct difference between what happened on the Mexican field and what happened on the U.S. field.
I maintain, and it was actually crazy for me to watch, but I maintain that the United States should have 100% won that game.
Yeah.
I think they could have easily won that game.
Yeah.
But as I said when we talked about rosters, their inexperience absolutely cost the United States the game. They made several silly mistakes that a player with larger World Cup or even larger tournament experience would not have committed. There were several early yellow cards to figures on that team.
Well,
You had Weston
this is
McKennie on a
this
yellow
is
card.
this is a referee talking point too. I think the McKinney yellow card was right. I think that the Dest yellow card was really soft. I think that
But
it's
here's
similar
the thing.
to
You saw what the referee was leaning towards with that early yellow card. So you knew
Yeah.
you really couldn't get away with anything. And yet
Yeah.
the United States continued to push. At one point you had Kristen Pulisic yelling at the referee to calm down. In what universe?
I just think the referee immediately went to his pot. Like, I think that there was a couple, and again, if you look at the first half of that game, the first 25 minutes, I think there were 5 fouls called in the United States, 2 of them which were yellow cards, and there was just one called on Wales. So I think that, again, I'm not blaming the refs because I think that there were inconsistencies on both sides. And if you watch the second half back, I think that Wales kind of got screwed by the referee on a couple occasions in the second half. So similar, like you said with Mexico, I think there were just inconsistencies across the board with the referee. And, I don't think the first one was yellow. I think McKinney, because I think McKinney's was coming in from behind. So no matter what, I think that was a yellow. I just think Dest's was a little soft, but probably a tackle he doesn't need to make because the player's on the sideline and he's there. It's not, not a tackle he needs to make. But yes, the inexperience showed. But there was a quote on Twitter by, I believe it was Hercules Gomez, who said, yes, we talk about the United States being extremely green going into this, but the greenest of them all is possibly Berhalter. And we saw it. We saw it in this. I mean, everybody on the planet, you talk to Scott Sanders, our colleague on 90 Min Football, who is a Welsh fan, was at the World Cup
at the moment.
in Qatar. So make sure you follow the 90 Min Football account, the 90 Min US account, for all that content, because he is bringing all that content to us. We talked to him after the game. He said he was shocked Kiefer Moore didn't start the game. So if the Welsh fan base is shocked Kiefer Moore didn't start the game, what is Greg Berhalter doing that he doesn't know what to expect from Kiefer Moore in the second half?
Well, and that's interesting that you say that, because I don't remember who said it, but from the U.S. men's national team said we expected it and we were prepared.
But it did not look like they were prepared, because Kiefer Moore ran ragged on them for the entire second half, was physically dominant over the entire back line. And he's giving me nightmares because again, being an Everton fan, he dominated us before the World Cup, and now I have to see him again dominating the U.S. back line. But he it just seemed, we went into the second half. The first half was phenomenal. Possibly the best half we played in a very long time.
Yeah.
Phenomenal. Controlled the game, took the Welsh fans out of it, controlled everything you needed to control. It was simple. But you had to know when we went into halftime, if it was that easy, that Wales was going to make a change and adjust. And they just didn't. They just like, oh yeah, here you go. We're going to play the same thing we just did. And again,
without energy, of course.
And I think
the predominant factor in dominance. Now, I do want to bring up the quote again. It was Tim Ream. He said, we were actually prepared for that to happen to start the match. We knew what we would do. We knew what needed to be done. And we're fully aware and fully prepared for that situation. He said that after the game, obviously contradicting Greg Berhalter. And if we're talking about his inability to make substitutes, besides the fact that Gio Reyna didn't start the game, which I've said in previous occasions is arguably their best player.
Yes.
Why was he left on the bench? Now, he has since confirmed it wasn't an injury, as many rumored would be. He came out after and said, I'm 100% fit. I was fully available. And then Greg Berhalter addressed the situation and said, at the moment, I addressed the situation by putting in Jordan Morris, who we have also spoken to before Qatar. And yes, it's a dream come true for him, as he said. It's on our social media channels and 90 Min US social media channels, but he wasn't the correct substitute.
No.
He did cite his speed, oddly enough, as the reason he included him in the game.
I don't know. Greg's really starting to get on my nerves, man. He's really
the banner reflects a lot of national
our producer right now really going
ourselves.
He woke up and chose violence. He's just, and listen, this is I think the subs that came on, unfortunately for the U.S., other than Gio Reyna, I think they had to come on.
Yeah.
Maybe you could have brought on Shaq more instead of DeAndre Allen. I just think that they didn't offer much. Like Kellen Acosta, I think lost the ball, kind of was leaving the ball
But
out
he
there
also
to be taken.
saved the U.S. from losing.
Well, he did. Yeah, no, and I obviously give him that. Yes, but from an attacking standpoint, a
Right.
possession standpoint, holding onto the ball, he comes in for Yunus Musa, who was very good at advancing the ball and pushing the ball forward. And it felt like he was just leaving the ball out there to be taken. He had some bad touches here and there. My brother even texted me, who he doesn't really watch the MLS. He doesn't really have a bias against the MLS. He doesn't have a bias because this will be the narrative that everybody has. It's been the narrative on Twitter all week since the game. But he doesn't have a bias against the MLS. But he said, who are these subs that we're bringing on?
Right.
Like, in fairness, there were two players that could change the game on the bench for the United States. One of them was Brendan Aronson. He came on probably a little too late because Weston McKennie was limping all over the field.
Yeah.
Very clearly could not get out to the right to cover his spots. There was so much room for Nico Williams on that side.
Right.
And then Gio Reyna is the second one, and he wasn't used. And it's a very big problem for me.
It's baffling.
It's a very big problem for me
honestly.
that Greg Berhalter doesn't have control over his camp right now because he's saying one thing, his players are saying a different thing on multiple different platforms in terms of, we're speaking out of both sides of our mouth right now with the world, with this team. And that's a problem.
We saw that they were going to crumble. This wasn't necessarily a strong team. This wasn't a unified team coming into it. And especially when comparing the U.S. men's national team to Mexico and Canada, both teams came out and said, we have a brotherhood. We're extremely united. And every single press conference, you saw each player defending one another. Now, with Memo Ochoa in particular, prior to the game against Poland, the media asked about Raul Jimenez and criticized the player for not being fully fit, but at the World Cup, to which Memo Ochoa came to his complete rescue. So seeing the complete opposite in the U.S. men's national team is not necessarily surprising to me, but interesting that it would fall apart rather quickly. Now,
I just real quick before we move on, I just think it's more of a Berhalter thing than anything else. Like, I think that I think those guys fight for each other. I think they like each other. I think there's a brotherhood there, but I think when it gets onto the pitch, as we've talked about before, Berhalter does not know how to get the best out of them because he does not play a system that suits their needs or their
he doesn't even have a system.
There needs to be a lot done in the next two games for Greg Berhalter to keep his job, in my opinion.
I think he wouldn't have kept his job regardless.
I don't think so either, but
head coaches don't stay after the World Cup cycle. Mm-hmm. But I think it needs to be addressed in the sense that when we're talking about subs, there needed to be one for Christian Pulisic. Like, he is not necessarily a 90-minute player. He isn't that with his club. He's a substitute player. Now, if you want to make him the face of the U.S. men's national team, absolutely, go ahead. But recognize when that player absolutely gave out on the field, which he did at around the 70th minute mark. He needed to be let out. There wasn't anything more that he could have contributed to that match. And that's when we saw a shift in the United States dominating against Wales. After I believe it was the 60th minute, players who kept making those runs, who pushed the attack, they lost steam, they lost gas. You needed fresh legs, especially when several players are coming back from injury. Obviously, we cited Weston McKennie. And if you don't want to play Gio Reyna the full game because he hasn't in quite a little bit, then sub him in. It's not something I understand, but with Berhalter, he did go rogue from the beginning. So talking about a system, he really didn't have any. Feeling extremely badly for Jesus Pereira. And it's important to point out that he used a starting 11 that had not once been used during the CONCACAF qualifiers in that way.
Yeah, I mean, I think in fairness, I will defend him in the sense that 95% of the World Cup qualifiers we haven't had our best players healthy. And I think in this game, you had to put your best players out there, but I understand what you're saying. But I again, like I said we talked about, I felt like he got the lineup 110% correct. I think that was the best lineup he could put out there. I wouldn't have started anybody else. Maybe Gio Reyna. Maybe Gio Reyna over Tim Weah, but that's it. But I also liked, as
You wouldn't
Greg
have
loves to
started
talk
Jesus
about.
Pereira?
No, I would have not
I
even come
find
close
that
to.
interesting because I do think Josh Sargent is on a better level right now currently, but how do you hope for your players to establish connections with others on the field if you never play them together more than once?
No, I understand what you're saying, but I think that in terms of this, and again, Greg talked about this, the physicality, whatever, I think that Josh Sargent is more physical than Jesus Ferreira. And that's why I would put him out there. I think Jesus Ferreira plays very well in open spaces, can find those runs, pick those runs, but he's not a guy who's going to hold up the ball like phenomenally. He's not a physical guy who's going to get up and fight with the big guys in the air. Like, again, Josh Sargent didn't really do that much either, because another point is the fact that the U.S. cannot cross the ball for their lives, which is, again,
it's interesting to me to watch Greg Berhalter have no established, I don't even want to say system, but hierarchy, because Jesus Pereira arguably was that go-to player. Now he's not even a sub. Okay.
But I mean, I think what you got to think about too with Jesus Ferreira is he's that go-to player in MLS, and he has been a go-to player.
No, but I meant for the U.S. men's national team. Now, when Ricardo Pepi wouldn't play,
yeah,
Haji Wright didn't even earn call-ups.
Again, this is a whole debate that we can have. We could sit here for an hour talking about how Haji Wright and Tim Ream didn't get called up for a year or whatever. Tim Ream, by the way, I would like to point out,
they don't deserve it.
I would like to point out that
if a coach doesn't have confidence in his players, how is a player going to then feel backed up by their coach? Yeah. And this is what I mean by unity. Like, Tata Martino spoke of his players and spoke of the hierarchy, and made it extremely clear who was making the cut and who wasn't. Whether certain media outlets wanted to speculate around what he was going to do or not, it really was just for attention and clicks. We knew Santiago Jimenez was not going to make it unless one of the other 2 or 3 were injured.
Yeah.
With Berhalter, you truly never know. It's a guessing game.
Yeah, and that's why I say it's his fault. And that's why I say it's his fault, because
it 100% is his fault. But then
I don't know how much you can blame that on competitiveness. Yeah, I don't know how much you can blame it on the players when they don't even know what's going to happen from time. And I fully expect, we'll talk about this when we preview it, I fully expect the lineup to be different on Friday.
I do too, but I don't necessarily blame the players. I just think Greg Berhalter propels an individualistic atmosphere within the U.S. men's national team, which could be seen on the field. Whereas when you watched Canada today, you saw a unified group. There was no one player who wanted to stand out more than any other. Now, we can argue Alphonso Davies shouldn't have received that penalty. Yeah. That's beyond the situation. But in Greg Berhalter lacking transparency when it comes to choosing players, you force others to think in a competitive manner and to doubt their place on the field to the point where you can't focus on anything else.
Yeah, I think that's, a difference from club to national team is that in club, there's always going to be competition. For you to have a good club team, you have to have competition fighting for those spots week in, week out, but that's a week in and week out thing.
Exactly.
With the national team, you don't have that week in, week out. You don't have, again, this World Cup, we had 10 days, not even 7 days with,
especially for MLS players.
Yeah, 7 days with everybody all together to put this team together. So, and that's something that every single coach knew coming into this World Cup 4 years ago.
Others had more camps to figure it out, but he never called the same group of players into one camp before.
No, but what I'm saying is 4 years ago, when this cycle started, and everybody, Greg Berhalter was there or whatever, everybody knew that in 4 years there was going to be a crazy situation where they weren't going to have more than a week to prepare. So that's something where you have to plan it from the beginning of the cycle, start figuring out from the beginning of the cycle and work that out. And again, I just think, I just think Greg puts the players in a very bad position by the way he runs his teams. And
I think he's lost complete control. Now, before we wrap up this elongated version of the podcast.
We could do this forever.
We could. We do have to give love to Costa Rica. Unfortunately, their result didn't warrant a lot of conversation. There's really nothing to be said about a 7-0 besides the fact that
I'm sorry, Costa Rica. I honestly,
Mercy.
on my, I'll take the blame for this one. I completely, honestly forgot they were even. I forgot CONCACAF was allowed to send more than 3 teams to the World Cup. I'll be completely honest.
They did play. They ended
did play
fourth
the
and then
playoff,
did the playoff match.
They popped up on my screen and I'm like, whoa, forgot that. Completely forgot that. So I apologize to the Costa Ricans out there who are hopefully watching our show.
Really, there's
Oviedo.
nothing to be
Big
said
Brian
or
Oviedo.
analyzing.
Yeah, no, there is. I was just saying I'm a big Brian Oviedo guy, former Everton player. So go him. But
he did great.
But yeah, I mean, let's be honest. If we're talking about the Costa Ricans, there's not much. It's like they're going to get.
I'm so sorry.
If you see the way Japan played, and this is another thing, I could talk all day about the U.S. The press clearly gave them a problem, but the way Japan played against Germany, it's not going to be easy for them in this group. So
no, and it's definitely a World Cup of surprises. Loved seeing Japan absolutely trash Germany.
I like Japan.
As Mexico did. I do want to point out, and I want to highlight that we should all learn from Japan fans who clean up after the games. The stadium. We should all learn to be more like that. But
I also love, just real quick, I love how and this is just a thing, obviously, across sports, it's something about their tradition. Love how they bow to the field after they get subbed off. That's a really cool thing that I think that they do. And it's just, again, it's one of those things that shows the tradition of the Japanese players. It's a different thing. It's one of those things you get at the World Cup because we're not watching Japanese matches aside from when they're playing US, Mexico, whatever. I think it's a very cool thing. I'm very happy for the Japanese team. They were awesome today. So yes,
World Cup full surprises. CONCACAF has yet to win at the World Cup. Mexico and the United States both tied, and Canada and Costa Rica obviously lost. So still hoping for that CONCACAF win. Hopefully it can come on Saturday.
Who do you think is the best chance?
I think it's difficult. Honestly, I think it's difficult. I think Canada at the moment, just because I don't see Croatia and Morocco as a strong figure. I'd love to say Mexico. I just think it's a very, very complicated group with no margin for error. That doesn't mean I don't believe in the team. I just think there's absolutely no margin for error.
Yeah, I think, and this is something I was going to say too, is just I think Canada had the best showing out of any of the CONCACAF teams that played this week. I think
that's a hot take. I don't think so.
You don't think so? I think that they were, despite losing, I think that they played really, really well.
Despite losing.
I think that they were the only team that was able to sustain that consistent attack, that pressure. Obviously finishing wise, they didn't finish well, but I think
well, there's also a conversation to be had on Belgium's quality this year, and the fact that every single year they're considered a dark horse. At what point does
they're
that
the number
change
2 team they're the number 2 team in the world? How are they dark?
So, but thank you so much for listening again. Stay tuned on this podcast and on our YouTube level and social media channels, both our personal and on 90 Min social channels. We will be back to preview all games on Friday. And then, as we just did, after the round of group stage matches, we will be recapping all the action of CONCACAF at the World Cup. Thanks so much for listening.
Bye.
See you next time.